The world tore open above the desolation, not as metaphor, but as gory fact, a fracture in the sky over a sprawling megastructure. Within the tier hung colors Geralt had never seen, crimson and emerald layers of warp light shredding the low storm clouds. He fell through the wound, not as a leaf or a knight, but as a man tumbling from one reality into another, his senses seared by the shock. Around him, chimneys of a hive city clawed upward like iron thorns, each tower bristling with spires and cables that vanished into smog. The air tasted of ash and ozone. His eyes found purchase on swirling shapes and luminous runes as he tumbled. Instinct guided his hand to a sign. Ard flared in his palm and he thrust downward. The blast slowed his descent, ripples of force rolling away across tin rooftops. He landed in a crouch on a ruined platform high above a teeming underhive, knees absorbing the impact. He stood quickly, scanning his surroundings with a hunter's calm. The fracture above convulsed, spilling one last ribbon of emerald light that faded as quickly as it came. The tier stitched itself closed with a sound like grinding stone. Only a few drops of that unnatural energy lingered, hovering in the smog like fireflies. He felt the air hum with unnatural presence. Strange, distant horns wailed, warning klaxons layered with mechanical voices. Somewhere far below, vast machines roared. Geralt straightened, drawing his breath through his teeth. He was not on the continent anymore. The architecture around him was impossibly tall, hundreds of stories of Gothic metal and stone. Pitted buttresses carved with skulls and flayed saints, enormous banners depicting a human figure enthroned in flames, pipework that vomited steam into the wet darkness. Black-suited drones moved along catwalks like insects, their eyes glowing red. In the distance, a jagged cathedral spire pierced the gloom, and he sensed an oppressive weight inside his skull, as if a godless presence pressed down upon him from the iron sky. He tasted the air with his witcher senses and gagged on Promethean smoke. He swallowed a swallow potion to sharpen his focus. Scenes of war and suffering echoed from these walls like ghosts. There were no birds, no wind, no open horizons, just the choking closeness of industry and a sky carved by endless chimneys. He peered over the edge. Down below, countless layers of hab blocks, platforms, conduits, and walkways disappeared into the gloom. The scale dwarfed anything he had known. You were far from Kaer Morhen, he thought, far from the forests of Temeria, from the empty roads and small villages. Now he stood amid a nightmare of iron, smog, and faith, built upon endless human suffering. A new hunt awaited him. He closed his eyes for a heartbeat, centering himself with the calm certainty learned from years of walking between worlds. He would find the scent here, track the source of the tear, and kill whatever had bled through. He took his first step into the hive city, descending the nearest rusted stair, while his medallion vibrated at his throat. The path ahead was dark. He welcomed it. The section ended with the echo of distant artillery and a feeling of weight pressing upon his shoulders. The stairs spiraled downward, rungs damp and slick with unknown fluids. As Geralt descended, the light from above dwindled into a jaundiced haze. He moved silently, boots avoiding broken pipes and snags. The soundscape changed gradually from the wind moaning through broken girders to the rhythmic clank of machinery, then to whispers carried by stagnant air. Faint voices rose from the depths, chanting, layered, fervent. He paused at a narrow landing and sniffed. Blood, old and new. The metallic tang mixed with the reek of oil. The medallion on his chest vibrated again, resonating with a frequency he associated with magic. He drew one of his steel swords, the blade glimmering dully in the limited light, and continued. The corridor opened onto a wider chamber lit by flickering flames. Rusted pipes and hanging wires wove overhead like vines. Hooded figures in tattered robes stood around a basin of blood and a steaming grate. They were chanting in unison, their voices cracked but fervent. Symbols daubed in gore covered the walls, 8 pointed stars and skulls with horns, marks he did not recognize, but which exuded malevolence. As he entered the chamber's periphery, the nearest figure turned. The hood fell back to reveal a human face disfigured by self-inflicted cuts and brandings. The cultist shrieked something guttural and raised a blade improvised from a piece of scrap metal. The others echoed him. They surged toward the stranger with an unnatural synchrony. Geralt did not speak. He extended his left hand and the sign Igni flared. Fire burst from his palm in a cone, engulfing the first rank of robed figures. They screamed, robes catching light, skin blistering, but more pressed forward. He pivoted, using limited space to his advantage, parrying one blade, pushing another cultist into the burning basin. The man's flesh hissed as he collapsed. Under his breath, Geralt murmured Erden, and a circle of violet energy expanded at his feet. Those who entered the trap moved as if wading through molasses. He took advantage, slashing at arms and throats with clinical economy. The battle lasted moments. When the last cultist collapsed in a twitching heap, the chamber fell quiet save for the crackle of burning cloth. The ritual implements they had been using shimmered with a sickly aura. A piece of jagged metal carved with runes that pulsed faintly lay by the basin. He picked it up, and his medallion thrummed more intensely. It was not Gwynblyde or earth magic. It was something else, something older, or perhaps from a different cosmos. He pocketed the rune shard for later study. He searched the corpses quickly. Each bore the same brand, an 8-pointed star on the chest, carved deep enough to embed itself in bone. The edges were fresh, evidence of zeal. Their eyes were dilated and bloodshot, mouths filled with dried gore. They had been drinking blood. He wiped his blade on a cloak and sheathed it. The atmosphere closed in again, whispering with the same chant, repeated by unseen mouths deeper in the underhive. The oppressive presence pressed down from the ceiling. He understood now that this place was infested with cults, their rituals feeding some hunger. And if there were cultists, there would be things they worshipped. He resumed his journey with heightened alertness, leaving the flickering chamber behind. The path ahead wound deeper into the hive's intestines, past leaking pipes and carved sigils. Each step took him farther from any memory of sunlight, but the hunter in him leaned into it. He moved like a shadow, ready for the next confrontation. This section faded on the image of blood cooling on metal, the whispers continuing beyond his hearing. He emerged from a tight maintenance shaft into a low tunnel lined with baroque statues of armored giants. The statues' red eyes glowed faintly, and each held a sword carved from stone. For a moment he thought they were decoration, relics of an empire that worshipped war. Then one of them moved. The giant shape detached itself from the wall with a hiss of hydraulics. Black ceramite armor glistened in the dim light, adorned with skull motifs and a winged icon. The figure stood as tall as a Nilfgaardian warhorse, broader than an ox. A helmet with no face looked down at him, lenses glowing ember red. It raised a weapon he recognized as a firearm, but unlike any crossbow he had seen, a massive rectangular gun with a box magazine covered in purity seals and runes. It spoke through a vox emitter on its chest, the voice deep and mechanical. Its words meant nothing to him, but the tone carried authority. 2 more giants stepped forward from the shadows, weapons raised. They did not attack immediately, as if waiting for his response. Geralt felt the medallion's vibration intensify, not with magic, but with mechanical field energy. He lowered his sword slightly, though he remained ready. He thought of using Axii to calm a peasant's goat, but these were no peasants. They exuded the aura of battle-bred hunters like him. Still, misdirecting them might buy him time. He drew a breath, summoned the sign with a twist of his fingers, and cast Axii toward the lead warrior. The Witcher sign shimmered, subtle and soft as a breeze. The giant's head cocked slightly. There was no change in their posture, no slackening of discipline. Whatever nerves or minds lay inside that armor, they resisted the sign easily. They advanced a step. A mechanical voice again barked something guttural. Behind them, more heavy footfalls echoed. There would be no conversation. He sidestepped, sliding toward a section of wall where pipes formed a narrow passage. In the same motion, he extended his hand and released a flash of white powder, Samum, one of his bombs. The concussion and blinding light filled the confined space, staggering the giants for a blink. He used that blink. He dove into the gap between two pipes, contorting his body through a cramped space where the giants could not follow. Shots hammered the metal behind him, slugs the size of his forearm punching holes through pipes and sending jets of steam and fluid spraying. He crawled like an animal, ignoring the hot water and stinging steam. The tunnel turned sharply. He rolled to his feet on the other side, hearing boots pounding as the giants attempted to find an alternate route. They shouted to one another in their tongue. He sprinted down the narrow corridor, turned another corner, then slid through a grate into an even narrower maintenance duct. He could not outrun those giants in an open field, but he could outmaneuver them here. He pressed forward, listening to their heavy footfalls fade behind him. For the first time since his arrival, he felt not alone in this city. Something of immense power and discipline prowled these depths, hunting. Was it hunting him, or something else? The weight of their presence lingered like heat in a smithy long after the coals had been banked. He would encounter them again, he knew. For now he slipped deeper into the hive, unseen, unheard. The section ended with the echo of his footsteps fading into the mechanical hum of countless machines. The memory of red eyes watching him from the dark. The path led him to a cavernous chamber, a cathedral of industry. Iron walkways crisscrossed the open space, and massive pipes as wide as trees threaded upward and downward through the dark. At the center of the chamber hung a grotesque engine, an organic heart grafted to metal. Veins of copper and tubes of iron pumped viscous fluid through its pulsing mass. Each contraction sent a shudder through the platform beneath his boots, a rhythmic thud that reminded him of a giant creature sleeping. Surrounding the heart were clusters of cultists in armor pieced together from industrial scrap. They hammered on the pipes with mallets, chanting with increasing fervor. Spiked banners bearing the 8-pointed star fluttered in the unnatural breeze. Sparks flew as they worked, showering the platform in fiery motes. He crouched on a walkway above them, watching. The pulsing heart radiated waves of oppressive energy that made his head throb. He could not leave this engine intact. He selected bombs from his bandolier, grapeshot and dancing star. His plan took shape with calm certainty. He moved along the walkway until he reached a position directly above the heart. He unhooked the bombs, twisted their fuses between his fingers, and dropped them with a flick. The bombs fell like stones into water. They struck the heart and surrounding pipes simultaneously. A blossom of flame and shrapnel erupted, the concussion wave flinging cultists from their perches. The heart shuddered violently. The fluid pumping through its tubes turned into steam. A high-pitched keening filled the chamber as the runes carved onto the heart flared red, then went dark. The entire engine convulsed, cables snapping, pipes bursting. Steam and blood rained from the ceiling. Cultists screamed, some burning, some impaled by shrapnel. He leapt down from the walkway, landing amidst the chaos. His silver blade flashed, cutting down a cultist rushing him with a jagged spear. Another lunged, and he used Ard to send the man tumbling backward into the boiling fluid. He pivoted to avoid a swing from a rusted chain, then drove his sword into a gap between crude plate and flesh. The man collapsed. More rushed him, but their coordination had been broken by the explosion. He danced between them, parrying, slashing, using Quen when necessary to absorb the impact of an axe. Each movement was deliberate, efficient. The heart behind him continued to rupture. The pressure building within its tubes culminated in a final detonation. A burst of red light tore through the chamber, pushing him to the ground. He rolled with the shock covering his head. When he looked up, the organic engine was collapsing, its structure disintegrating into smoke and ash. The rhythmic pulse ceased. A long moment later, the chamber echoed with the sound of failing pumps. The entire hive seemed to hold its breath. Then slowly, the ambient hum returned. He climbed to his feet, blood and oil streaking his armor. The cultists lay scattered, some dead, some groaning. Those still able to fight crawled away, muttering prayers to their blood god. He did not pursue them. They would not reassemble quickly. He surveyed his work. One of the engine's shattered tubes still glowed with residual energy. He approached and touched it carefully. A jolt ran through his hand. For an instant he saw visions of other worlds, glimpses of deserts of bones, seas of blood, towers of machinery. He withdrew his hand and shook off the vertigo. Whatever power had been channeled here was linked to the tear he had fallen through. Destroying this heart would slow it, maybe even prevent another breach. He took a deep breath of sulfur and blood. When he exhaled, the taste lingered, metallic and bitter. He wiped his sword clean on a dead cultist's cloak and sheathed it. The path forward led away from the dying engine, deeper still. The section closed on the image of the shattered heart, twitching faintly, as if the madness it had pumped through the hive might yet find another conduit. He found a ladder at the chamber's far edge, leading upward through a narrow shaft. Climbing rung after rung, he emerged onto an exterior walkway. The change in temperature was immediate, a cold wind whipping his hair as the smell of scorched metal mixed with open air. He stepped into the ashen dusk of the hive city's upper levels. The sky was a bruise of smoke and firelight. Spires rose like skeletal fingers above him, their pinnacles piercing the low clouds. Far below, the lights of the hive flickered like candles. The scale was vertiginous. He could see the city stretching out in every direction, a labyrinth of bridges, buttresses, and towers built upon other towers. Fires burned in distant districts, sending plumes of smoke into the heavy air. Flying creatures wheeled through the gloom. Harpies? No, not harpies. Their wings were ragged, their bodies twisted by mutation. They resembled the striggers and wyverns he had fought, but their eyes glowed unnatural orange, and their claws exuded warp energy. They were drawn to blood and carrion. They saw him. One of the creatures screeched and dove, talons extended. He drew his steel sword with his right hand, and his silver sword with his left, holding both at once. The first creature crashed into his Quen shield with a crackle of blue energy, ricocheting backward in a flare of sparks. He slashed upward, severing a wing. The beast tumbled, shrieking as it fell into the abyss. Another swooped from the side. He ducked, slashed its belly, then used Igni with a quick gesture. Flames engulfed the creature, its shrieks trailing as it fled into the dark. Two more hovered out of reach, scanning for an opening. He stepped toward the railing, crossbow in hand. He loaded a bolt tipped with draconid oil and fired. The bolt thudded into one creature's chest, the poison burning through mutated flesh. It convulsed and dropped. The last creature circled warily. He watched its pattern, anticipating its dive. When it lunged, he sidestepped and thrust his silver sword upward. The blade slid through its jaw into its skull. It hung on his blade for a heartbeat, its eyes dimming, then fell away. He wiped blood from his face, breathing hard. The wind whipped at his hair, swirling ashes around him. He leaned on the railing for a moment, looking out at the world. It was truly a world. Entire mountains of metal and stone, thousands of stories of misery. He saw trains of servo skulls carrying messages, lightning arcs from cathedral spires, titanic statues of armored saints. Far beyond, he glimpsed a momentary flash of green lightning along the horizon, perhaps another breach. The sky itself looked sick, yet in that bleakness there was also a strange beauty. The way the orange embers illuminated the edges of black towers, the way the storm clouds glowed with internal fire. The magnitude of it humbled him. He had fought cursed barons and ancient vampires. He had traversed bogs and ruins. But this industrial nightscape, dwarfed them all. Somewhere within it, the cause of the breach lingered. He turned away from the view. The walkway continued, lined with gargoyles and statues. He followed it toward a distant opening, leaving behind the corpses of the winged beasts. His medallion still vibrated, urging him onward. This section ended on the image of him disappearing into the mouth of the hive again, the wind still carrying the sound of distant roars. The corridor opened into a hall unexpectedly quiet. The noise of machinery faded, replaced by the hush of reverence. Rows of candles flickered along stone benches. At the far end of the hall stood a statue carved from golden alloy. It depicted a man larger than any mortal, clad in armor adorned with wings and skulls, his head crowned with a halo of spikes. One hand rested on a sword as tall as Geralt. The other reached out as if to bless or command. At his feet, carved in relief, grovelled multitudes. The statue's eyes were gemstones glowing faintly. The aura here shifted from the oppressive presence of chaos to something stern and ordered. A robed figure knelt before the statue, head bowed. The robe was worn, the edges frayed. A symbol of a double-headed eagle was embroidered on the back in faded thread. As Geralt entered, the robed figure turned. The man's face was lined and gaunt, eyes deep-set. He looked at Geralt without fear, only fatigue and a flicker of surprise. They regarded each other. Geralt's medallion hummed softly, not as warning but as resonance with some other field. He sheathed his sword out of respect. The robed man raised a hand, palm outward, a gesture of welcome or benediction. He murmured words in a language Geralt did not know, but the cadence carried the weight of prayer. He reached toward the base of the statue and lifted a small object wrapped in cloth. It was a simple pendant shaped like a skull with wings, very similar to his own medallion. He extended it toward Geralt with both hands. With calm certainty, Geralt accepted it. The pendant was cold but warmed quickly in his hand, thrumming in rhythm with his heartbeat. He had no understanding of its significance, but he felt its weight, both physical and metaphorical. He nodded. The man smiled weakly, a fleeting warmth in this cold world. He gestured toward a side passage, then returned to his kneeling posture. The hunter understood. This was a shrine to their god, and the robed man was a priest, one of countless souls who kept vigil in a world consumed by war. Respect required silence. He bowed his head briefly to the statue, though he did not serve this emperor. He respected devotion wherever it was found, if it did not require innocent blood. He slipped the pendant into a pouch and turned toward the indicated passage. As he left, he felt the statue's gaze follow him, not as a presence but as the weight of millions of prayers. Did this emperor answer? Did he know or care of the chaos cults infesting his hive? Geralt did not know. He only knew that faith could be a weapon and a solace. Behind him, the candles flickered. Ahead, the corridor narrowed again, leading deeper into the veins of the hive. The section ended with the soft glow of candles receding behind him, the pendant's faint vibration reminding him he now carried something of this world's burden. The next chamber was a roar of machinery. Enormous gears, larger than houses, meshed with one another, rotating slowly but with unstoppable force. Pistons rose and fell like the strokes of titanic hammers. Ladders and platforms clung to the moving parts, providing precarious paths for maintenance workers. The air was humid with vapor and oil. Along the edges of the chamber, underhive workers in tattered fatigues huddled, eyes wide with fear. They stared at the far side of the room, where a breach had opened in the wall, and out of which scuttled creatures that made the earlier mutated harpies seem quaint. These things were part insect, part human nightmare. They moved on 4 or 6 limbs, their bodies armored in chitinous plates that dripped with acidic slime. Their heads were elongated, eyes multifaceted, and glowing red. Mandibles clicked, spraying spittle. They darted between the gears with unnatural agility, unaffected by the crushing force of the machinery. They lunged at the workers, ripping with claws and dragging the living into the darkness from which they emerged. Geralt did not hesitate. He leaped onto a moving platform, landing with the ease of a man used to precarious footing. He ran along it toward the creatures, mindful of the shifting gears and exposed belts. A mutant sprang at him, mouth gaping to reveal rows of serrated teeth. He met it mid-air with the flat of his steel sword, using the creature's momentum to hurl it into the gap between two massive gears. The beast screeched as the gears crushed it, chitin cracking like nutshell. Another reared up behind him. He pivoted, using Igni to blast it, flames licking along its shell. It screeched and writhed, throwing itself away. A third circled, waiting for an opening. He tossed a northern wind bomb onto the walkway before it. Frost exploded outward, coating the gear and the creature in ice, slowing it. He then closed and decapitated it with a swift strike. He moved like a ghost among the moving metal, anticipating the rhythm of the pistons, jumping over gaps just as teeth of a gear passed. Mutants swarmed, but he controlled the fight, using bombs to shape the field and signs to create space. He noted that some of the workers had picked up tools, hammers, wrenches, and were fighting back timidly. One swung a pipe at a beast and was batted aside, blood spattering. Geralt caught the creature's claw with a parry and drove his steel into its head. He shouted a single command, though no one would hear words, only his tone, and pointed toward the exit. The workers understood. They began to flee, scrambling across the platforms toward a safer corridor. He covered their retreat, cutting down any creature that attempted to follow. At one point, a mutant clambered onto a gear directly above him. He threw a dimeritium bomb. The blast created a surge that disrupted the creature's unnatural energy, stunning it. The gear's teeth closed around its limbs, tearing it apart. The battle felt endless, but soon the flow of mutants slowed. He pushed forward toward the breach from which they emerged. He could see into the darkness beyond, an egg chamber, slick and pulsating, connected to some other realm. He tossed a grape-shot bomb into the breach and turned away, leaping back toward the walkway. The explosion shook the entire chamber. The breach collapsed inward, sealing with rubble and molten metal. The remaining creatures shrieked and scattered. The pistons continued to rise and fall undisturbed. He breathed heavily, sweat mixing with oil on his brow. He looked around. The workers were gone, safe for now. He wiped his blade clean, then sheathed it. The giant gears groaned around him, their endless grinding returning to monotony. He hopped onto a descending platform, riding it down to a lower level. The memory of chitin cracking under the weight of iron lingered with him, along with the knowledge that in this world even the machines had to be protected from what lurked beyond. The section ended with the echo of machinery pounding like a giant heartbeat and the smell of burning chitin in the air. He continued downward, each level of the hive bringing new sights of despair and industry. At last he entered a section long abandoned. The walls were lined with niches, each containing skulls stacked meticulously. Dust hung thick, disturbed only by his footsteps. The air was cool and still, untouched by the heat of machines. His medallion vibrated softly, guiding him. He descended stone stairs into a vault. Iron arches supported the ceiling. In alcoves, statues of armored warriors stood sentinel, their visors empty yet accusing. On the far wall, behind an altar, was a mural depicting a starship descending from the heavens, raining light upon a kneeling crowd. The mural was cracked, the colors faded. On the altar lay a weapon. It resembled a crossbow but was heavier, its limbs carved from metal, etched with runes unfamiliar even to him. The string was a band of braided metal, and the stock contained a chamber that hummed faintly. In place of bolts, there was a cylindrical magazine of small, glowing rods. He approached slowly, listening for any trap. His medallion hummed in a steady rhythm now. He reached out and touched the crossbow. A surge of energy traveled up his arm. For a moment he saw images of battlefields unknown to him, armies of armored giants, monstrous machines, demons bound in chains. The crossbow accepted his touch, its runes flaring briefly. He lifted it. Despite its size, it balanced well in his hands. He aimed it experimentally, feeling the weight, then slung it across his back next to his silver sword. It might be the tool he needed to face whatever horrors awaited. As he turned to leave, one of the statues moved. It pivoted stiffly, joints creaking like ancient hinges. Its skull face turned toward him, hollow eyes ignited with green light. It raised a rusted sword. Others stirred as well. The guardians of this place had awakened. He drew his blade, meeting the first downward strike. The skeleton's strength belied its brittle appearance. Sparks flew as steel met rusty iron. He parried, then delivered a riposte, severing the skeleton's arm. It continued to swing with its remaining hand, unfeeling. He sidestepped and cut through its spine. It collapsed into a heap of bones and armor. Another lunged, sword raised. He kicked it back, then used Erden to slow it. The rune circle glowed around the skeleton's feet. Its movements became jerky, easier to read. He decapitated it with 2 strokes. The others pressed forward. He shifted to the crossbow, loaded one of the glowing rods, and pulled the trigger. A bolt of pure energy discharged, lancing through a skeleton's torso, disintegrating it. The sound was a low thrum, the recoil minimal. He smiled grimly. This weapon had been designed for beings not of his world, but he would make use of it. He fought through the guardians, combining sword and crossbow, magic and skill. When the last bone collapsed, the vault grew silent once more. He looked around at the skulls lining the walls. Who had placed them here? Were they honored dead or enemies entombed? He would not know. He left the vault, the new weapons slung across his back, and climbed back up into the maze of the hive. He carried now not only his swords, but a piece of this world's history, a tool that had slain monsters across stars. The section ended with him ascending the stairs, torchlight fading behind him, the cold whisper of those skulls like an audience left behind. Eventually, after more turns and climbs, he stepped through another hatch and found himself in a wide open courtyard within the hive. It resembled a fortress courtyard, though built of iron, and adorned with statues of saints and skulls. The sky above was visible through broken sections of roof. Snow drifted down, mixing with ash. Around the courtyard, small fires burned in braziers. Huddled in the corners were families, thin and pale, their eyes wide with fear. They watched him warily, children clinging to mothers, men gripping makeshift clubs. At the far end of the courtyard stood a tall gate, sealed with heavy chains. Beyond the gate, he could hear screams and the roar of engines. Something pounded against the iron, the chains rattled. He moved toward the gate. The people shrank back, uncertain whether he was friend or foe. As he reached the gate, a section buckled inward. A mutated brute forced its way through. It was at least 3 meters tall, a mass of muscle and bone, its skin split by brass implants and spikes. Its eyes glowed red, its mouth a vertical gash full of jagged teeth. It carried a huge cleaver made from a repurposed industrial blade. Behind it surged smaller mutants armed with clubs, pipes, and jagged metal, their bodies contorted. They howled, the sound echoing off the walls. Geralt stepped forward to intercept. He raised his crossbow and fired. The energy bolt slammed into the brute's chest, searing a hole. The creature roared, stumbling but not falling. He rolled aside as the cleaver came down, the impact sending shards of stone flying. He slashed at its leg, hamstringing it. It lurched, reaching for him with a massive hand. He ducked under the grasp, drove his sword up under its ribcage, and twisted. The brute fell backward, crashing onto a pile of rubble. It convulsed once, then lay still. The smaller mutants, momentarily stunned by the fall of their champion, recovered and charged. He drew his steel blade and met them. This fight was not as clean as the previous. The courtyard offered less space. He parried one club, then felt a pipe slam into his shoulder. Quen flared, absorbing most of the blow. He thrust, piercing a throat. Another mutant grabbed his arm. He headbutted it, felt bone crack, then drove his sword into its gut. He pivoted, crossbow now in his left hand. He fired point-blank at a third creature, vaporizing its head. He fought with savage efficiency. The civilians watched in horrified fascination as the stranger moved between monsters like a dance. Soon, all that remained were corpses steaming in the cold air. He breathed hard, chest heaving, blood, some his, some others, spattering his armor. He turned to the people. They stared uncertain. He nodded toward the gate, silently telling them it was secure. A brave woman stepped forward, her expression equal parts gratitude and fear. She nodded in return. Slowly, the families began to move, gathering their few belongings and looking for a way out. He had done what he could. He wiped his blade clean and sheathed it. The crossbow hummed faintly on his back. He looked up. Snow continued to fall, melting as it touched hot metal. Somewhere above, he heard the drone of engines and the distant thuds of artillery. The war in this hive never ceased. He needed to move. He left through a side arch, leaving the civilians to their uncertain fate, carrying with him the memory of children's hollow eyes. This section ended with snowflakes landing on the red-hot carcass of the brute, sizzling away like moments of peace in a world of fire. The corridors he followed led him back into more active sections of the hive. The hum of machinery returned. So did the heavy footfalls of armored giants. He felt them through the metal floor before he saw them. He emerged into a long hall lined with columns carved with script. At the far end stood the same black-armored warriors he had encountered before. Space Marines, he realized now, from the whispered legends he had heard in other worlds. This time there were more, 5 figures forming a firing line. Their weapons were leveled at him. He raised a hand slowly, palm outward. He had no interest in fighting them. He had destroyed a heart, sealed a breach, saved workers and civilians. They still saw him as unknown. The lead warrior barked a command. The others fired. Mass reactive rounds screamed toward him. He threw up Quen. The shield flared, absorbing the first few shots before shattering. He dove to the side, rolling behind a pillar as bullets tore through the stone. Dust and chunks of rock exploded around him. He considered running, but the hall was long and exposed. He prepared a bomb, but then hesitated. Killing these soldiers would only bring more and would waste time. He thought of Axie and dismissed it. Instead, he reached for Erden. He cast the sign across the floor in front of him, the runes glowing violet. Then he stepped into the open, crossbow aimed downward. He deliberately lowered his weapons and raised both hands, hoping the trap would slow them if they advanced. The Marines paused. The lead one spoke again, the voice amplified. There was a note of command, but also curiosity. Perhaps they had seen the crossbow he carried, recognized its make. He responded not in their tongue, but with the slow, deliberate placement of his swords on the ground. Then he gestured to himself, then to the left side corridor. He hoped to convey his intent to depart. One of them stepped forward. As he crossed the Yerden circle, his movements faltered for a heartbeat. He looked down, noticing the runes. He stopped, raising a fist. The others held their fire. A tense silence fell. The lead warrior tilted his helmet as if considering. He stepped aside. Geralt nodded once, retrieved his sword slowly, and backed toward the side corridor. He kept his hands visible, his posture unthreatening. Only when he was around the corner did he turn and run. He heard no pursuit. The Space Marines allowed him to go. Perhaps they had recognized his usefulness against the hive's infestations, or perhaps they had other orders. He could not know. He continued down the side passage, heart pounding less from fear and more from adrenaline. He had faced many foes, but seldom had he felt so small as under those red lenses. The section ended on his acknowledgement that alliances are sometimes born of necessity, even unspoken ones. He continued toward the deeper heart of the hive, leaving the black-armored giants behind, their discipline and restraint noted. As he moved deeper, the architecture changed. The walls became smoother, the air filled with the hum of energy fields. He entered a series of chambers lined with glass tubes containing suspended forms. Humans? Mutants? It was hard to tell. Many looked like children, their bodies twisted by the very fluid that sustained them. Tech priests moved along the rows, murmuring prayers to machine spirits. He avoided them, slipping through maintenance shafts and catwalks. His medallion vibrated not from magic, but from the electromagnetic fields that crisscrossed the area. He came upon a scene of panic. A group of servitors, cybernetic slaves with augments replacing limbs and skulls replaced with cogitators, was malfunctioning. They had broken from their programming, flailing mechanical arms and lashing out with servo claws. A group of unaugmented workers was trapped in a corner, a heavy door jammed. One servitor reached for a young man, whirring saw blade spinning. Without thought, Geralt leapt in. He parried the saw with his steel sword, sparks flying. The servitor's strength was mechanical. It pushed. He rolled with the force, then slashed through an exposed bundle of wires at its elbow. The limb fell away. He pivoted to face another servitor that advanced on the cowering workers. He cast Ard, the telekinetic blast throwing the machine backward. It crashed into a pile of crates, but quickly rose, gears spinning. These enemies felt no pain, no fear. They simply followed malfunctioning orders. He could not reason with them. He ducked under another blade, rolled forward, and drove his silver sword into the servitor's chest, piercing whatever passed for its heart. Sparks erupted. The machine convulsed, then went still. He pulled his blade free and spun to meet the next. He slipped between the mechanical limbs, cutting wires and smashing lenses. His sword strokes were precise, each aimed to disable. The final servitor swung a hydraulic press at him. He sidestepped, then slammed the hilt of his sword into the machine's cranial cogitator. The skull unit cracked, and the servitor twitched to a halt. The workers watched, stunned. He sheathed his swords and pulled at the jammed door. It groaned but did not budge. He placed his hands on the seam and channeled Ard, a focused blast along the edges. The locking mechanism shattered, and the door slid open. The workers filed through, murmuring thanks in their language. He nodded, then turned back toward the corridor. One of the tech priests, his face half covered by augmetics, approached. He extended a mechadendrite, offering a small vial of shimmering liquid. Geralt took it. The tech priest muttered something, perhaps a blessing of the Omnissiah. The Witcher sensed no malice, only gratitude. He added the vial to his pouch, wondering what effect it might have. He left the chamber quietly. Behind him, the tech priests resumed their work, tending to their machines with reverence. He had saved lives, but he knew it was a droplet in a sea of suffering. Still, every life mattered. He pressed onward, the hum of energy growing louder. This section ended with the image of a single child's face looking through the glass of a growth tube, eyes wide, as the Witcher disappeared into the shadows. After hours of navigating corridors and shafts, he reached a space that felt ancient, even within this ancient hive. The walls were carved with scenes of battles fought by armored saints against horned demons. Columns rose to a roof lost in darkness. Pew-like benches sat in rows coated with dust. At the far end stood an altar, dominated by a skull carved from stone, its mouth open in a silent scream. He approached. The air here was different. No machinery hummed. There was a stillness like the pause between heartbeats. He touched the stone skull. It was cold. He closed his eyes and listened. No voices came, no whispers from beyond. Yet the medallion on his chest vibrated softly. Something lay beneath this place. He searched for a hidden passage. Behind the altar, partly concealed by a tapestry, he found a stair descending into darkness. He lit a torch and began the descent. The steps were worn, the walls damp. At the bottom, the stair opened into a cavern lit by bioluminescent fungi. The cavern's floor was uneven, strewn with the remains of skeletons and rusted armor. In the center rose a pillar of stone etched with runes. At the top of the pillar was a crystal glowing faint blue. It pulsed slowly like a heartbeat. Around the pillar, shadows moved. Creatures lurked in the gloom. They were slender, almost skeletal, with elongated limbs ending in claws. Their bodies were draped in tattered robes. Their faces were skulls with glowing eyes. They watched him, heads cocked. He tightened his grip on his sword. One moved forward, skittering on all fours with unnatural speed, but stopped at the edge of a circle etched into the floor. He realized the circle was a ward, perhaps placed by the builders of this cavern to contain the things within. The creatures could not cross the line. He approached the pillar. As he drew near, the crystal brightened. His medallion vibrated in resonance. He reached out. The moment his fingers touched the crystal, images flooded his mind. A planet in flames, ships falling from the sky, armored giants fighting beasts. He saw a figure wielding a weapon like the crossbow he now carried, closing rifts, always moving, always hunting. He felt a kinship, another hunter, another soul bound to an endless war. The images passed. In their wake, the crystal shattered, fragments dissipating like dust. The light vanished. The creatures hissed, but did not move. Their glowing eyes dimmed. He felt the ward fade. He stepped back, readying himself, but the creatures dissolved into shadow, retreating into cracks in the rock. The cavern was dark again, the faint light of fungi all that remained. He climbed back up, leaving the crystal's remnants behind. When he emerged into the cathedral, the air seemed lighter. The stone skull on the altar appeared less menacing. He understood that this hive contained pockets of ancient power, some aligned with order, others with chaos. He had broken one such nexus, perhaps preventing it from being corrupted. He blew out his torch and continued onward, the silence following him like a cloak. The section ended on the image of the skull's open mouth, darkness receding from within its depths. The path led him through a maze of conduits and elevator shafts until he reached a chamber that was both industrial and ritualistic. A vast vat stood in the center, filled with molten metal glowing bright orange. Around it, cultists chanted, their voices rising and falling in time, with a giant piston hammer that pounded rhythmically into the glowing pool. Each impact sent sparks flying and molten droplets spattering. The cultists tossed objects into the vat, skulls, icons, pieces of machinery, feeding it as if it were a hungry god. Above, suspended from chains, hung a figure bound in barbed wire. He was alive, his eyes wide with terror, his body covered in cuts. His blood dripped into the vat. The cultists' chant intensified with every drop. Geralt understood. They were forging something with flesh and metal, imbuing it with chaos. He could not allow it. He assessed the environment. The vat was large, the molten metal lethal. The cultists were many. He needed to disrupt the ritual quickly. He selected a salmon bomb and a grape shot. He approached quietly along a catwalk, staying in the shadows until he was close enough. Then he hurled the salmon into the middle of the group. The flash and concussive blast disrupted their chant, blinding and disorienting. He followed with the grape shot, pieces of shrapnel tearing through robes and flesh. He leapt down, landing near the bound man. He drew his steel sword and swung, cutting through the barbed wire. The man fell, and Geralt caught him with one arm, pulling him away from the vat. Cultists recovered, screaming with rage. They charged. He cast Igni, a sheet of flame roaring outward. Robes ignited. They flailed, some falling into the molten metal. He parried a thrust, then kicked the attacker into another. He felt heat from the vat searing his skin even through armor. He kept moving, never staying too long in one spot. He heard the bound man crawling away, sobbing. Good. He needed to keep him alive. One cultist, larger than the rest, lunged with a chain. The chain wrapped around Geralt's arm, pulling him toward the vat. He used Ard, the blast breaking the chain's grip. He then rushed the man, ramming his shoulder into the cultist's chest, driving him backward. They teetered at the edge. With a quick twist, he used the man's momentum to pivot and throw him over. The cultist screamed as he plunged into the molten pool, the liquid swallowing him with a hiss. The ritual space erupted in chaos. Cultists scattered, some attempting to carry away small objects from the vat. He cut them down, leaving no remnants. When the last cultist fell, he approached the vat. The molten metal churned, its glow still intense. He took a deep breath and cast Ard, focusing all his will. The telekinetic blast struck the surface, sending a wave across the vat. Molten metal sloshed, spilling over the edge and extinguishing some of the fires. The ritual structure cracked. The giant piston hammer stalled. The chanting ceased. He looked at the rescued man. The stranger's eyes were wide with fear and awe. He murmured something, perhaps a prayer of thanks. Geralt nodded, then gestured for him to leave. The man staggered away, clutching his wounds. Geralt watched him go, then turned to the corridor beyond. The path ahead led toward a new resonance, a deeper, more malevolent pulse. He cleaned his blade and followed. The section ended with the vat's glow dimming, molten metal cooling over the bodies of the cultists. He climbed a ladder that seemed to go on forever. Each rung was slick, each step a test of endurance. He wondered briefly how far he had come, how deep he now was within the hive. Memories of Kaer Morhen flickered through his mind, snow-covered battlements, the laughter of fellow witches, Vesemir's gruff counsel. He remembered Yennefer's violet eyes, the smell of lilac and gooseberries. He remembered Ciri's smile, her footsteps as she raced through the halls. Those memories grounded him. He reached a platform, paused to catch his breath. The platform opened onto a long hallway lit by dim, lumen globes. The air here was cooler. He allowed himself a swallow of water and a small bite of dried meat. It was the first time he had eaten since arriving in this world. The taste brought a sense of normalcy. He thought about the rift that had brought him here. Who or what had triggered it? Was this entire hive simply unlucky? Had his hunt for a lesser vampire in a swamp somehow torn a seam between realities? Fate had a twisted humor. He considered what would happen if he did not find a way back. He would become another ghost in this city, another story whispered by survivors. But he was not one to dwell on failure. He resumed his trek. The hall led to a series of bunkers. He peeked inside one. It was empty, bunk beds stripped, personal items scattered. A child's doll lay on a mattress, its button eyes staring. He moved on. In another bunk he found a wall covered with drawings. They depicted saints, machines, and monsters, a child's attempt to make sense of their world. He paused, touching one drawing lightly. It portrayed a knight with wings, sword raised against a horned demon. The knight's armor bore a symbol similar to the pendant he carried. He smiled faintly. Even in the depths of a hive, hope lingered. He continued, passing through more abandoned living quarters. Occasionally he heard skittering or muffled voices, but he saw no one. He felt the presence of watchers still, but they did not interfere. This section served as a lull, a moment to gather thoughts. He emerged into a broader hallway lined with cracked frescoes, each depicting a victory of the emperor over some alien or demon. The styles differed, some crude, others detailed, suggesting they were painted over centuries. He traced a finger along one, feeling the grooves cut by unknown hands. He felt a connection across time. People here had fought and died for millennia, their stories etched into walls. He, a stranger from another world, now added his steps to their history. He took a deep breath. Forward. The section ended with him walking past the last fresco, the sound of his boots echoing, his mind anchored by memories of home and the knowledge that even in the darkest places, art and hope survived. The deeper he went, the more organized the resistance against chaos became. He began to see barricades manned by disciplined troops in grey armor with insignias of skull and laurel. They waved him through after cursory inspections, their eyes lingering on his weapons. He heard Vox transmissions crackling through static as commanders coordinated responses to uprisings. He was no longer alone in his fight, though he remained an outsider. In one cavernous chamber, he encountered an officer with a bionic eye and a cloak of flayed skin. The officer regarded him with suspicion and led him to a communications room where a holographic representation of a stern-faced man awaited. Inquisitor Malresh. The hologram flickered, static swirling through its edges. The Inquisitor asked questions in a tone that brooked no refusal. Through an acolyte translator, Geralt explained the basics, that he had fallen through a breach, that he hunted the cult responsible, that he wished only to stop the chaos. The Inquisitor studied him. The medallion on Geralt's chest hummed. The man's eyes held the weight of judgment. After a moment, Malrek nodded slowly. He spoke, his voice like gravel. The translator said the Inquisitor had authorized Geralt to continue his efforts, but warned that if he turned on Imperial citizens, he would be deemed heretic. Geralt inclined his head. Trust did not exist here, only measured tolerance. The Inquisitor flickered away. The officer escorted Geralt out, handing him a small device, a Vox bead, tuned to an emergency channel. In case, the officer said through the translator, "We might need your blade." It was an offer and a leash. Geralt accepted, placing the bead in his ear. He moved on. He thought of the black-armored giants he had met earlier, of the robed priest in the shrine. Hierarchies within hierarchies, all serving a god-emperor who might be a corpse or a deity or both. He had no stake in their politics, but he respected their discipline. They too fought against chaos, albeit on a scale unimaginable in his home. The medallion thrummed again. Through the Vox, he heard a frantic transmission, reports of a major ritual taking place in a Prometheum refinery, the last barrier between the cult and a rift. The Inquisitor's gravel voice barked orders for all available units to converge. He understood. His path and theirs converged. He tightened the straps on his armor. He checked his bombs, his crossbow, his potions. He drank a swallow of thunderbolt to heighten his reflexes, and a swallow potion to accelerate healing. His pupils narrowed. He moved faster, boots pounding the metal floor. He heard distant explosions, gunfire, the roar of chains words. The final confrontation approached. The section ended on the sound of his heartbeat quickening in time with the growing hum of the warp, two rhythms ready to collide. The refinery loomed before him, a sprawling maze of pipes, vats, and catwalks. Flames flared from vents, casting everything in a lurid red glow. Chaos banners hung from cranes, their sigils stained with blood. At the center, on a raised platform, stood a hulking figure clad in brass and bone, wielding a chain axe the size of a man. His armor was fused to his flesh, horns sprouting from a helmet. He was the champion of this cult, the one the workers called Carrick. Beside him, waving a staff of twisted metal, was a sorcerer draped in flayed skin. Around them, cultists chanted, their voices building toward frenzy. A tear in space hovered behind the champion, raw and bleeding, a swirling maw of crimson and green. It pulsed with malignant life. Geralt felt it tug at his own flesh, a force that wanted to pull him in and flay him. He stood at the base of the platform, crossbow in hand, sword ready. He stepped forward, each footfall deliberate. The champion laughed, a sound like grinding gears. He spoke words that dripped with contempt. The sorcerer raised his staff, power coalescing. Geralt moved. He fired the crossbow. The bolt of energy streaked across the space, striking the champion in the chest. The impact staggered him but did not fell him. He roared and charged, chain axe swinging. Geralt rolled aside. The axe bit into the metal floor, sparks exploding. He slashed at the champion's exposed arm. His silver blade bit deep, drawing black blood. The sorcerer unleashed a bolt of warp lightning arcing toward Geralt. He cast Quen. The shield absorbed the first strike, but the second cracked the barrier. He ducked, letting the bolt strike a pillar, which exploded. Cultists surged toward him, blades raised. He threw a dancing star bomb. Flame erupted, consuming the nearest zealots. He pushed forward, ignoring the lesser enemies, focusing on the champion. Their blades met again. The champion's strength was immense, each blow sending vibrations up Geralt's arms. He responded not with brute force, but with speed, sidestepping, cutting, using the champion's momentum. He saw an opening, drove his sword under the champion's arm, twisting to sever tendons. The champion howled and swung wild. Geralt ducked, then slashed across the back of the champion's knee. The giant staggered. Meanwhile, the sorcerer chanted. The rift behind them widened, demonic forms pressing at its edges. He had little time. He lunged, driving his blade into the champion's chest. He wrenched it free, then fired a crossbow bolt into the sorcerer. The bolt pierced the sorcerer's skull. The man convulsed, his spell snapping. The rift pulsed, unstable. The champion still moved. He grabbed Geralt with one hand, lifting him off the ground. Geralt gasped, feeling the pressure on his ribs. He reached for his dagger and slammed it into the champion's eye. The grip loosened. He dropped, rolled, regained his feet. He drew his knife and slashed the champion's Achilles tendon. The giant fell to one knee. He seized the moment, leaping onto the champion's back, driving his sword down between the plates of armor, piercing the heart. He twisted and pulled upward, splitting ribcage and spine. The champion convulsed, his blood spraying. He toppled forward, crashing onto the platform. Geralt leapt clear. The rift's edges bulged as something massive tried to push through. He had little time. He loaded a BFG charge into the crossbow. He aimed into the rift. He pulled the trigger. The bolt fired, a sphere of green energy. It entered the rift and detonated. A shock wave of emerald fire erupted, sending Geralt flying back. The rift shrank, convulsed, then collapsed, leaving a charred scar in reality. The cultists who remained screamed and fled, or were cut down by black-armored giants who burst onto the platform moments later. The duel was over. Geralt lay on his back, chest heaving. The Deathwatch kill team surrounded him, weapons raised. For a heartbeat, he thought they would shoot. Instead, they lowered their guns slightly. Their leader nodded once, a subtle acknowledgement. He nodded back. He stood slowly. The section ended with the sound of demonic screams fading and the rift sealing, leaving only the flicker of flames and the heavy breathing of survivors. In the aftermath, the refinery shook. Without the ritual's stabilizing force, the machinery went wild. Pipes ruptured, vats boiled over, structures groaned. The Deathwatch captain barked orders, his team moving to secure the area and evacuate any surviving workers. Geralt watched as the black-armored giants acted with efficiency and care. They were soldiers, but they were also protectors. The Inquisitor's voice crackled over Vox, ordering the immediate containment of the site and the destruction of any residual chaos matter. Geralt took a step back, surveying the ruin. His mind was still humming from the energy discharge. He realized his presence here would soon be unwelcome. Already human soldiers were arriving, their eyes wary. The Deathwatch captain approached him, towering over him. His helmet lens glowed. He spoke slowly, his tone respectful but firm. The translator crackled, telling Geralt he had done well but must now surrender for decontamination. He looked at the portal that shimmered behind him, a new rift opening. Emerald, not crimson. He recognized its feel. It was similar to the fracture he had fallen through, but stable. It called to him. He met the captain's gaze and shook his head. He pointed to the new portal, then to himself, then made a walking motion. The captain hesitated. Through the Vox, an authoritative voice, Malrex, ordered the captain to stop him. Rifles raised. He knew he could not fight his way through this time. He took a breath. The pendant he had been given in the shrine warmed against his chest. He could stay, face endless suspicion, be cut open in some mechanicus lab, or he could step through the unknown and return to a life where at least he knew the rules.
He chose. He broke into a run, heading for the portal.
Bolters roared behind him. He felt one round graze his shoulder. Quen flickered. He dove, throwing himself through the emerald light. It enveloped him, sensation of falling and weightlessness returning. Behind him, the roar of the refinery faded.
Ahead was something else.
The section ended on the image of Geralt vanishing into the portal, bullets passing through empty air, the Death Watch standing down with weapons lowered, but eyes still watchful. For a brief moment he hung between worlds. Colors blazed around him, green and white, streaks of time and space folding. He heard voices whispering in languages he did not know. He saw glimpses of mountains, forests, deserts, and stars. Then he was thrown forward. He stumbled, his boots scraping stone. Cold air filled his lungs. He looked up. He stood within the courtyard of Kaer Morhen, snow falling softly, the familiar scent of pine and cold stone filling his nose. The fortress walls loomed around him, their weathered stones a balm to his eyes. He took one step forward and heard a growl. From the green portal behind him emerged a creature not of his world. It was a beast like those he had fought in the hive, muscles corded, horns curling, eyes burning like coals. It sniffed the air, then roared, lunging toward him. He cursed quietly. He had hoped to leave the warp beasts behind, but one had followed. He drew his crossbow and fired. The energy bolt struck the creature's shoulder, searing flesh and blowing off part of its arm. It roared and swung its remaining limb. He dodged, then slashed with his steel sword. The blade bit, but the creature's skin was tougher than human flesh. He pivoted, drove his sword into its gut, pulling it across to spill black ichor. It did not fall. He cast Yrden, the circle slowing the beast's movements. He rolled to the side, reloaded the crossbow, fired again. The bolt struck the creature's head, punching through bone. It stumbled, then collapsed onto the cobbles, twitching. He stood over it, breathing hard. The portal behind him wavered, then closed, leaving only a green smear in the air that faded. Snow continued to fall, covering the creature's corpse in a thin blanket. Geralt looked around. The courtyard was empty. His fellow witchers were out hunting or training. He was alone, but he was home. He dragged the beast's body to the side, planning to study it later. It might hold answers about the connection between worlds. He wiped his blade clean on the monster's hide. He went inside, kicking the door closed behind him. The hall was warm, the smell of stew hanging in the air. He sighed quietly. It felt like waking from a nightmare. He removed his armor, setting it on a bench. The pendant he had been given now hung next to his wolf medallion. He touched both. He wondered if this would be the end of his involvement with the other world. He doubted it. The connection had been made. Portals seldom remained closed forever. He warmed his hands by the fire, his mind replaying the sights and sounds he had witnessed. He poured himself a cup of mead. He sat, staring into the flames.
Outside, the snow kept falling.
The section ended on his face illuminated by firelight, eyes reflecting both weariness and resolve. The days that followed were a blur of familiar routines, sharpening blades, repairing armor, hunting drowners in nearby swamps. Yet the memories of the hive city stayed with him. At night, when the hall grew quiet and the other witchers retired, he would sit alone, sipping from a flask, and see again the towering spires, the black-armored giants, the cultists chanting around an organic heart. He would hear the hum of machines, the roar of chain axes, the whisper of snow falling on iron. He would feel the weight of the pendant from the shrine warming against his chest. Ciri visited, bounding through the gates with wild energy. She saw the new crossbow and insisted he tell her everything. He did, speaking in low tones by the fire. She listened with wide eyes. When he described the endless staircases, the mechanical heart, the giant marines, she laughed softly, then grew serious. She asked if the worlds were safe from each other now. He replied with calm certainty that nothing was ever fully safe. His voice carried the weight of experience. She hugged him, whispering that she was glad he had returned. He smiled, the first genuine smile since his return. Yennefer wrote from Vengerberg, her letter scented with lilac. She asked if he had encountered any sorcerers as stubborn as she. He chuckled and wrote back that no sorcerer could match her. Vesemir, ever practical, asked if the crossbow could be replicated. Geralt shrugged. He doubted any smith on the continent could craft such a thing. In the evenings he would take the crossbow into the courtyard and practice. Its bolts cut through targets with ease, leaving trails of light. Lambert and Eskel watched, whistling. They joked about him bringing home toys from other worlds. He took their ribbing in stride. Yet there were moments when he would catch his reflection in a shield and not recognize the man staring back.
He had seen so much darkness, so much scale.
He understood that his world, with its petty kings and monsters, was just one speck in a vast cosmic battle. It did not make his duties less important. If anything, it heightened his resolve. Because if he failed to keep monsters from villages and roads, who would? One night, as he stood on the battlements watching the stars, he saw a green flash on the horizon. His medallion vibrated faintly. He felt the pendant warm. He did not know if it was simply aurora or a sign of another rift. He did know that if a breach opened again, he would be ready. He touched the crossbow, then his silver sword. He whispered under his breath a promise to protect both his world and, if he must, any other he was flung into. The section ended with him turning from the wall and descending back into the keep, leaving the snow and stars above. Weeks later, rumors reached Kaer Morhen of a monster killing livestock near a remote village. Geralt set out, crossbow on his back. The trail led him into a forest where the trees grew so close they blocked out the sun. The scent of blood and rot guided him. He moved silently, senses alert. The creature revealed itself in a clearing. It was unlike any he had hunted on the continent.
Its body was lanky, its skin translucent, veins pulsing with dark ichor.
Horns curled from its head, and in its eyes burned the same orange glow he had seen in the hive.
Warp-tainted.
The beast snarled and lunged. He cast Quen, deflecting a swipe. He slashed with his silver sword, cutting flesh that smoked. The beast shrieked, its voice a mix of human and demon. He fired the crossbow. The energy bolt punched through its chest, burning a hole. It staggered, then lunged again. He danced aside, slashing again, then thrusting. The beast fell, writhing. Black ichor pooled on the forest floor. He stood over it, breathing hard. The pendant warmed. He realized that the corruption had followed him. Perhaps his crossing had weakened the barriers. Perhaps the pendant itself was a beacon. He did not regret bringing the weapon. He had needed it here as well. He burned the beast's body, watching the flames consume it. The smell was noxious. He returned to the village and collected his payment, but his mind was already elsewhere. He realized that his hunt had changed. No longer confined to the curses of this land, he now walked paths between worlds. He understood that somewhere in a hive of iron and ash, black-armored warriors and inquisitors continued their war. He knew that the people he had saved would speak of him as a spirit, a ghost that descended from a tear in the sky. He also knew that if called again, he would step through a rift without hesitation. This was his path. To hunt monsters, no matter where they lurked. To protect the living from the horrors beyond understanding. To carry the weight of two worlds on his shoulders. He adjusted his swords, his crossbow, and his pendant. He set off down the road, his footfalls steady. The wind sighed through the trees. Birds took flight. The section ended with the image of the Witcher disappearing into the forest, his silhouette framed by the light filtering through the branches, the echo of rip and tear carrying softly on the breeze. If you hunger for more tales of impossible encounters in the dark millennium, smash that subscribe button. And the Emperor protects those who support the channel.